safe for the driving public, for the workers, and for the repairs of the highway. Mr. Speaker, the opportunity to make political points has long passed.
He'd like you to move adjournment.
And
when you're ready, just say I'm move adjournment.
Order, please. No, member can keep going. We have till 6.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, then in summation, that I feel myself as a driver, all the members of the House of Assembly as drivers, we should lead by example, and we should show that we are responsible, show that we would like to see this legislation go forward, and show that maybe when the Mothers Against Drunk Driving make their presentation, that if they want it mandatory, maybe their government should consider that and be more applicable.
We've reached the moment of interruption. The subject of this evening's light debate is submitted by the honourable member for Halifax, Clayton Park. The honourable member for Digby, Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to stand here and speak for the young fishermen of this province, and also about a policy that was put into place many years ago to protect these same people. In 1979, the Honourable Romeo LeBlanc, with his great wisdom, saw that the owner-operator policy in the inshore fishery would protect coastal communities and the people who lived in them. This policy was to make sure that all communities and independent people always had access to a vital resource, the fishery. The owner-operator would keep the wealth spread all around the coast by one person holding one license per species. It always was and still is that one family would hold 4 or 5 licenses. An example would be 1 lobster, 1 ground fish, 1 herring, 1 mackerel, etc. Mr. Speaker, this was a good system. When one fishing season ended, you would go into another, keeping you and your crew employed nearly year-round. When a captain or owner-operator got ready to retire, he would sell out to his son or to a crew member who had been fishing with him for years. This whole enterprise would be sold for a very fair and reasonable price. For example, only back in 1998, you could buy a boat and all inshore licenses for $200,000 to $400,000, according to the age and shape of the boat and gear, etc. This money could be financed through the Nova Scotia Fisheries Loan Board or other financial institutions. Mr. Speaker, I want you to know that these examples are from the fishery in the western and southwestern part of Nova Scotia that I'm very familiar with. As you probably know, only 1 year after 1998, in the fall of 1999, the Supreme Court of Canada made a very serious decision that changed the fishery of this country and also changed the way young local fishermen could finance these enterprises. This decision, which was called the Marshall Decision, gave First Nations people the right to fish for a moderate livelihood. Mr. Speaker, as you know, this decision did not go over well with a lot of people that fished in coastal communities of Atlantic Canada. The fear was that they thought the fishery was going to be taken away from them and given to the First Nations people. In some communities like Burnt Church, New Brunswick, fighting broke out between local fishermen, First Nations, and also the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. At the same time, in western Nova Scotia, we, the local fishermen, decided that we would meet with the First Nations to see if we could work this out at the meeting table. The fishermen were told that we must talk first, and then need be, we would fight later. But this fight never happened in southwestern Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, we talked of working with each other in the fishery under the same rules and regulations that have been in place for decades. These rules and regulations in the lobster fishery has kept this fishery in great shape for decades, much better than any other fishery that did not have these same rules. Our forefathers, along with Romeo LeBlanc, saw these rules were good for the Atlantic Canadian lobster fishery. Mr. Speaker, finally a decision was reached by the Association of 963 licensed lobster holders in my district and by the First Nations chief that we would work together, and DFO accepted this. Mr. Speaker, decision was made by DFO to buy a number of existing boats, gear, and license for the First Nation people. As this went on for a few months and DFO tried to buy lobster licenses, fishermen seemed reluctant to sell them to them. I think this all stemmed back from lack of trust between DFO and the fishermen. Mr. Speaker, DFO was not pleased that fishermen would not sell them, so in their great wisdom, they started raising the price for these lobster rigs to make the fishermen sell. This began to work slowly, but it also brought a lot more attention from outside investors. These outside investors believed if they could buy this fishery out, it would be a great investment for them. If they owned the whole fishery, they believed they could catch them cheaper than the communities could and then sell them for a high profit. So these outside investors started paying more for fishing licenses than DFO was paying. Then the prices for them started raising as DFO and outside investors started bidding against each other. They bid above each other to the point where $200,000 to $400,000 licenses was going for $800,000 to $1.2 million, all in the matter of 6 months. Now, how could a fisherman's son or crew member ever find financing to buy one of these rigs at this price? Financing institutions, including Nova Scotia Fisheries Loan Board, would not put out over $1 million for a $200,000 to $400,000 rig. These lobster rigs became artificially inflated by two great powers, one looking for the control of that fishery by owning it, and one for greater access for First Nations people, both with money enough to own it all, with one using taxpayers' money. Mr. Speaker, where does this leave the young inshore independent fishermen? No financial institute in this country will lend these people this kind of money to buy a lobster rig, not even the Nova Scotia Fisheries Loan Board. So the question is, what will our young sons and crew members do? Personally, 2 years ago, I ended up giving my fishing rig to my son. This is the only way I could see that this young man could enter this fishery. Mr. Speaker, it seems that the outside investors had an answer also for the inshore fishery. They created the so-called trust agreements. They worked by outside investors buying up the lobster license of the inshore fishery, and then they hired the captains to work them. In the Department of Fisheries, these seem to be legal because the license in the department system is in the name of the hired captain. But in the outside investor's office, on a legal form signed by the same captain, this lobster outfit is owned by the outside investor, lock, stock, and barrel. Our young fishermen will never be owners. Mr. Speaker, it is believed that these captains and crew are paid much less for doing this job and in turn creating more profit for the owner. It is believed that this is just the beginning of this in the inshore fishery. As these rigs are accumulated into a few hands, there will become fewer and fewer jobs in the inshore and less communities with an inshore fishery. Remember, this happened in our midshore ground fishery in places like Digby Neck, where at one time 50 fish draggers supplied 10 fish plants. Today there are 5 draggers supplying 1 fish plant, all sold out for big bucks far away from Digby Neck, leaving these communities crippled and a lot of workers on welfare and off to Alberta. Mr. Speaker, we sat and watched this happen in our midshore ground fishery because we didn't know how to stop it. We cannot let history repeat itself and let this happen in our inshore lobster fishery of this province. If these coastal communities of Nova Scotia lose these independent inshore fishing enterprises, we will be seeing these communities as ghost towns because they're not far from it right now. Mr. Speaker, go to the western and southwestern Nova Scotia and ask every person what is keeping the economy going in that area. The answer will be it's the small independent inshore fishing industry that's still spread out into the hands of many individuals, and they're spending every cent in them communities. Mr. Speaker, my hopes and the coastal community's hopes are that this provincial government will play a big part in helping our new young independent owner-operators into the fishery of this province. If it doesn't do that, then I sure hope it doesn't become a bigger part of the problem like using taxpayers' money to turn our communities into ghost town. Thank you.
Thank you. Recognize the Honourable Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'm very pleased to stand and talk to this opposition motion that is before the House, and I want to thank the members opposite for underlining concerns and issues that are facing our coastal communities right across this province, not just in Indianapolis, not just in Argyle, but everywhere in this province. That the lifeblood of our coastal communities, of course, is the inshore fishery. You know, and I think in this discussion that you know, you could go around and you could point lots of fingers of who's responsible or who's not responsible for some of these issues that have hit upon us. Over the last number of years, successive ministers, when the member for Cumberland North was the Minister of Fisheries at the time, I know that a lot of these issues were brought forward. Going to the Aboriginal issue, you know, I'm not going to stand here and absolutely disagree with the Supreme Court's decision, but that's sort of a stepping point to where that exacerbated the issue of owner-operator. And you know, the bidding war that ensued after the decision was made by DFO to purchase some of these licenses, and the bidding war began between big companies, people with money, and the smaller fishermen. Just brought it out of reason. It was absolutely out of reason, and it's a shame that this was allowed to go forward. I want to thank the member opposite, the member for Digby Annapolis, for all his work during that process. He speaks, you know, humbly about the discussions and the work that was done by the local fishing associations in bringing in the Aboriginal groups to discuss the issues with them, to make sure that there was harmony amongst the two groups at that time. And I think in Southwest that there has been relatively an easy transition between those bands that were lucky enough to sign a good fisheries deal, that were able to have licenses to go forward with, and we're integrated into the fishery in Southwest. I know of fishermen who not only donated fishing equipment. Here's some equipment to get you started. Here's some ropes. Here's some ideas on where you should go fishing. And I think the integration happened almost seamlessly. I mean, with very little conflict. And I want to thank the member opposite for the work that he did amongst the group there. And you know, it took a lot of guts, I think, for a lot of those fishermen to stand up and say, no, this isn't that bad. This is something that we can work with because it's important for the whole fishery and for our local communities. We talk a lot about capital gains. We talk a lot about owner-operator. And I'm just going to turn to capital gains for a minute, because in the transfer of licenses, now that they have dropped a little bit in price, they still haven't dropped, I think, to a point where the common guy can actually buy a license, because we're still in the range of, I think the last I heard was some $600,000-$700,000. I think they have dropped a little bit in price. But in the transfer of license between generations, which is where we've been trying to focus for some time, is to ensure that fathers can transfer their licenses without penalty to their sons or daughters that want to be fishermen, that want to be fisher people, and which is why that we have been advocating this to the federal department for quite some time. And I want to talk a little bit, and further on down these prepared notes that they have that I'm not using at all, it does talk about how capital gains is attached to the federal system and how capital gains is connected. But I want to talk a little bit about the situation of capital gains, the situation of license transfers, and those types of things. And it does fall within the realm of the DFO. As the members opposite are aware that there is a plan set forward by a gentleman by the name of John Hanlon, who was I believe the district director for DFO out of Antigonish, I believe, for Gulf region. And he's been tasked with the issue of owner-operator to delve down into it, to look at the protection of that inshore fleet, the survival of that inshore fleet, to try to maintain as closely as possible that independence. I think that ensures its survival. He's put forward a number of options to help secure that independence. If implemented by DFO, these concepts, particularly in the lobster fishery, which I think is the one that the member opposite speaks to the most, is one I think that I'm more familiar with, and it is the lifeblood of Southwest, also lifeblood of places like Pictou West and places like Guysborough County, and those types of constituencies that are very dependent upon their fisheries. It will make it more likely that fishermen will be able to control their businesses into the future. It's a first step in the right direction, although it won't completely solve the problem of getting the necessary dollars to buy a license. The Hanlon proposal includes an option, Mr. Speaker, for owner-operators, independent fishermen to incorporate. The incorporation will provide fishermen with business tax benefits, including a $500,000 capital tax exemption when they transfer their license. Now this is one we've talked a lot about, because this is the same tax exemption that farmers are able to benefit from on transferring their property intergenerationally from fathers and families to the new generation. If the proposal accepted, the intergenerational needs of the owner-operator will be addressed. So I'm hoping that issue will help bring down some of the prices, some of the cost of these licenses. Fishermen will have an incentive to incorporate their businesses and then pass those licenses down to family members and avoid that capital gains tax. DFO at this time is also looking at reviewing the Fisheries Act. As a part of the review, the province of Nova Scotia has asked DFO to look at the option that would allow the provincial loan boards to hold fishing licenses as security, as we had the discussion in yesterday's session. If this request is implemented, then by the province, we'll be able to loan money to fishermen to buy a license, to actually mortgage that piece. With the license as security, if it happens that fisher person defaults on the loan, then the provincial organization, the Fish Loan Board, will be able to make the license available to other potential fishermen who are willing to accept that debt. We're not allowed to do that at this point. So that's why we're very happy that the federal DFO has decided to look at that Fisheries Act and help update it, because it is 132 years old. So it is time that we do see some updates on that. This will allow us provincially to ensure that a new generation of fishermen are able to remain in our coastal communities. I spoke a little bit on this change to the Fisheries and Coastal Resources Act during second reading. Although this may be just a change in a few words, it will have the impact on the fishing industry in regards to securing money for capital investments such as boat loans. By putting the approval limit for loans and other guarantees and regulation, we'll be able to make changes based on what's happening in the industry and provide our clients with a better service by shortening the wait time for approvals. So, if we do get the changes that we've been asking for from DFO for some time now, we will be able to quickly move to accepting loans of a greater size. So if we're looking at a loan for I'm hoping, let's speak honestly in here, is that a license at $800,000 to me doesn't make a lot of sense, but maybe a $500,000 or $400,000 is probably a more realistic number, that the day comes that you'll be able to buy a vessel, gear, a license will probably price you in somewhere around $1 million. And I was looking for the latitude in order to make those changes quickly, that if it did become 1.2 or something like that we can make changes in it. But I want to thank the member again opposite for bringing this issue forward. It seems over the last few sessions that fisheries hasn't been necessarily a big topic. There have been other topics that have taken precedence upon this issue over the last number of sessions, and I'm very glad to stand here on my second time of standing and talking about the importance of our coastal communities, the importance of the fishery, the importance of the lobster fishery in specifics, and the protection and the enforcement, I'm hoping, of the 1972 fleet separation policy brought in by Romeo LeBlanc, but unfortunately was ignored since 1972. And you've seen fleets change and things change, which that was the start of losing the control within our coastal communities. So, Mr. Speaker, as we go forward, and that my department will be working its hardest to ensure that the handling proposals are as tight as they can be, that the communities are informed of those decisions and of those policies, and that they will come into law and come into to being in a very short period of time.
Thank you. Recognize the honourable member for Pictou West.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I too welcome this opportunity to have a few minutes to speak about the fishing industry in Nova Scotia and the very great importance it is to our coastal communities. And I do thank the member across the way for bringing this issue forward here today and for the minister's comments. But the resolution reads that therefore it be resolved that the government realize that young fishermen in Nova Scotia are struggling and the government work to find ways to help them. And while the minister has outlined some proposals and some ideas, but I guess really that's where they're at. They're really not enacted. They're not really at this moment helping our young fishermen that want to get into the business. I guess we're hopeful that maybe those will come forward and be enacted in law or be in cooperation with our DFO, with the federal government, that some of these issues can be put forward and will help our young fishermen out there. Now, I come from the North Shore, Mr. Speaker, from Pictou County and along the Northumberland Strait, and certainly there's a number of fisheries there in the spring and summer and fall. I suppose the lobster fishery is the best known. In May and June is our season, but this year it was a particularly bad season for local fishermen. In fact, DFO is saying it's the lowest catch in 25 years since 1980. So it may be young men or women out there that are thinking about getting into the fishery in my area, Mr. Speaker, are wondering, is it worth their while? They see their fathers or uncles or grandfathers struggling to make a living along our shore, and I'm sure some of them are thinking about it. But generally, there's other impediments, I guess, to young people trying to get into the industry. Certainly overall, though, the industry is $1 billion industry in Nova Scotia, and approximately 1.1, 1.2, I believe, in total, but on the catch that is there, it's a higher value added when the time you count the processing. But the history of fishing in this province stretches over centuries, over close to 500 years, I would say. If you go back to the days of Jacques Cartier, or even before that, there certainly were Aboriginal people here fishing long before that. And the normal pattern of events is that the son would follow the father into the business and be established and keep the industry going, keep the business going in the family. And that was good for our local communities because it allowed money to stay in the local economy. It allowed our gas stations to be busy, and our grocery stores and our hardware stores and so on, because the quality or the fishing kept going. You know, the son followed the father, who would follow his father into the business. And I can certainly think of families in my communities where this has gone on for generations. Family like the Langels in River John, or the Elliots in Tony River, the Faulkners in that same area, the Logans in the Caribou area, the McDonalds, and so on. There's lots of examples of generations of fishing in the community. But now, of course, because of problems in the fishery, young people are maybe employed, working for their father, working for a neighboring fisherman, but many of them, of course, are not able themselves to buy into the industry, to get a boat or gear or license, and some of them are moving away to other provinces, moving to Alberta, maybe working in a meat packing plant or working in the oil industry out there, but they're not following their family's tradition of staying in the fishing industry simply because of impediments that are there. One of those impediments, Mr. Speaker, is the high cost of licenses. And when prices have escalated to $400,000 or $500,000 in my area, or even close to $1 million in Southwest Nova, even higher than that, I've heard, who can afford to get into it? How can you justify spending that kind of money, even if you could get access to the capital? And there, Mr. Speaker, is the problem, is getting access to the capital so the young person can get into the fishery. They maybe approach their bank or approach the credit union, and they say, no, sorry, we can't lend you that kind of money simply because the boat is worth so much and the gear is worth so much. But really, a lot of the value there is in the licenses. And that's what's being transferred, that it's sort of an intangible. And the lending institution doesn't want to take a chance on it and lend money on something that's they can't recover, or they don't see, I guess, as collateral. There's nothing there for them to back up their loan. So if they approach the Nova Scotia Fisheries Loan Board, they run into the same problem. They're told, no, it's an intangible, we can't lend you money on that. So I know while the minister mentioned that perhaps he's working on a solution there with the federal, with the DFO, and I'm hopeful certainly that's going to come forward, that in time young people will be able to borrow money for the whole enterprise, for the license, the boat, the gear, everything to get started and away they go. They're offering the experience. They've been at it since they were 13 or 14 working on their father's boat, but they don't have the access to the capital. So it's difficult right now, Mr. Speaker, for that young person to get into the industry, and it's difficult for the retiring fisherman to step out or to step down. He can't find a buyer for his fishing business because there's no young person that can afford to get into the business. So this is one solution that would help our young fishing families. The other issue that was raised, Mr. Speaker, was around the capital gains cost of getting into the industry, and it's very expensive tax-wise to be able to afford to buy a fishing enterprise. Somebody's got to pay that tax. Is it the new person getting in, or is it the retiring fisherman getting out? But if it's valued at $500,000, who's going to pay the tax on that huge capital gain that's there? And I can remember I had one family approach me on this very issue. A 72-year-old retiring fisherman. He wanted to sell it to his son-in-law. He found because of the tax implications it was going to be just impossible. So then he said he wanted to give it to his son-in-law. And again, because the Income Tax Act is coming into effect, that there would be implications for taxes paid. And he just eventually went to an accountant, and he talked to him, and I think they did something around incorporation to find some way around part of it. But in the end, they still had to pay a lot of tax. And that's a major problem. So I know in the province of Quebec, they've found a way around this. They have allowed for capital gains allowance in conjunction with that province, and up to $500,000, $500,000, the same as that farmers enjoy, the same as small business people enjoy. And if one province can do it, why can't we do it here in Nova Scotia? The precedent is there. Their fishermen are able to transfer from father to son or from one generation to another much quicker and much easier without paying the full large amount of tax. So while I know the minister has been having discussions with his federal counterparts, I wish he would aggressively pursue that and find a way that our young fishing interests can stay here in Nova Scotia, not have to go to Alberta to work in a meat plant or an oil patch or whatever, and be able to carry on the family business. because if they're able to stay here, they're adding value to our economy. They're actually helping all the local stores and businesses, and it just keeps that tradition alive. And I think that's what we all want. We want our fishing industry to thrive and survive. And so, Mr. Speaker, I know my time is drawn to a close, but it is a serious problem, and I think it's imperative upon government to work to find these solutions, whether it's through the Income Tax Act or whether it's through the Fisheries Loan Board. There are solutions out there, and it's vital that we keep our coastal communities strong and vibrant and find ways for our young families to stay in the fishing industry. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
No, order, please. You only speak once on the... We have about 20 seconds if any member that hasn't already spoken wishes to speak. If not, we've reached the end of the time for the debate brought forward. Thank all the members for taking part in this very important debate in this House tonight. The House will resolve itself back into second reading on Bill number 254. Now, member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It seems like I was just up here, but anyway, I enjoy or have the opportunity here to speak for a couple minutes on Bill 254, the Motor Vehicle Act. And this is an act to amend Chapter 293 of the Revised Statutes of 1989, the Motor Vehicle Act. And I guess the main aspect or principle in this bill is around the alcohol ignition interlock. And but really it's all about finding a method or a way of cutting down on drunk driving. And as we know, Mr. Speaker, that is still a very, very serious problem in our province. And there are still accidents occurring because of people that are taking a chance and are driving while under the influence of alcohol. And you know, we all know of cases or instances where people have lost loved ones because somebody made a stupid mistake of having a drink and then going out and driving on our highways. And really that's what it is, Mr. Speaker, is an immature or a stupid decision by somebody to figure they can drink and then also drive on our highways. And personally, I can relate to this, Mr. Speaker. It was 34 years ago that I lost a close family member, a cousin of mine, in a motor vehicle accident caused by drinking. Young people out for a good time on a Friday night, and maybe it was more socially acceptable then that people did drink and drive. And unfortunately, 3 of them lost their lives in Colchester County in that crash. But I'm sure there's lots of other examples of people that have experienced the same tragedy. So it is a very serious issue, and I think it's one that I'm glad to see the government bringing something forward here. It's not the be-all and end-all. It's not going to solve all the problems, but it's a step along the way, and it will help in some respects. I know the organization called MAD, the Mothers Against Drunk Driving, have been pushing hard not only for this piece of legislation, but for others that would help to save lives of people from people that are drinking and driving. And just as another example, on the weekend, Mr. Speaker, in the town of New Glasgow, there was a motor vehicle accident, and there were 7 young people involved in that accident. I think it was on a Saturday evening and 6 of those young people ended up in hospital with quite serious injuries, and again, it's suspected that alcohol was the contributing factor. In our local, I guess it was the provincial paper on Monday, there was a story about a mother that will never forget, a Pictou County woman that lost a child due to a drunk driver. And she says when she lost her 10-year-old son, says, the drunk driver, he came through my family like a tornado and ripped it apart. And, you know, it's unless you experience it yourself, I guess you don't really know the consequences of how somebody can feel. when they lose a loved one just suddenly like that, that's because of somebody's mistake by drinking and driving. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm glad to see that finally this legislation is being introduced, and it's something that our party has pushed for a number of years. And the member, I think it was, from Pictou Centre had, as a private member's bill a number of years ago, the similar legislation, and our party has pushed for it for a number of years. And I think the government had actually introduced this legislation themselves in 1999, and for some reason it was never proclaimed, but I'm glad to see it back here on the agenda again, and let's hope this time that it will be proclaimed. Other provinces have introduced it. MAD, like I said, has been recommending this for a long time, and I guess it's proven technology that, and certainly a valuable tool to cut down on the number of drunk drivers. Basically, an alcohol ignition interlock is just a small mechanical system that's hooked directly to a vehicle, and the car will not start, so I assume it's hooked also to the starter or to the electrical system without it. A couple questions, I guess, Mr. Speaker, that I might raise around it is how effective it is. I suppose there's somebody that has more technical expertise than I that could answer that, but will it work if someone else blows into it? You know, if a passenger is in the front seat and decides to blow into it rather than the driver that's intended for, is there some way around that? That's a concern. Also, it doesn't mention in the bill, but what is the tolerance level? Is it 0% or is it higher? It doesn't say exactly what it's going to be. The other concern I have around is it's voluntary only, and if a driver is convicted of being under the influence and loses his license for 12 months, my understanding is that if they voluntarily agree to bring this alcohol ignition system into their vehicle, then their sentence could be reduced to as low as 3 months. So maybe there's certainly an onus on the driver to want to have that in his vehicle so he can get his license back sooner. But I wonder, in some cases, Mr. Speaker, if it should be mandatory, because there's some people may find ways around it or may wish to find another way to get around, get his license back sooner. But maybe voluntary will work because you'll want your license back. But in some cases, people will probably get around it anyway, and I think mandatory might be a better system. But overall, Mr. Speaker, it's just another tool in the fight against drunk driving. There's other things like the graduated licensing program and checkpoints by our police officers, license suspensions. My colleague from Cold Harbour Eastern Passage mentioned that we need a 14-day suspension for sure for people that are suspended for between 0.05 and 0.08. There's more can be done, but certainly this is a step in the right direction. What really, I guess, we need to get to the point where it's socially unacceptable to be drinking and driving. And education really is the best key to make that happen. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I want to support the bill, but looking forward to maybe more initiatives by government to continue the fight to stop those that are drinking and driving. So I look forward to seeing it move forward to law amendments, and with that, thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognized now, Minister of Community Service. We close the debate on Bill number 254.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the members opposite for their constructive interventions, and I would move that we close debate on second reading of Bill number 254, the Motor Vehicles Act.
Motion is for second reading of Bill 254. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favor say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried.
Bill number 254, an act to amend Chapter 293 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Motor Vehicle Act.
For this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable Deputy Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With the concurrence of the House, I'd like to revert back to the presentation of reports of committees.
Is it agreed? Agreed? Agreed. Report of committees.
Law amendments. I am directed to report the committee has met and considered the following bills. Bills number 232, an act respecting the practice of optometry. Bill number 235, an act respecting dispensing of attritions. Bill number 243, an act to amend Chapter 8 of the Acts of 1990, the Emergency Measures Act, and Chapter 376 of the Revised Statutes, 1989, the Public Service Act. Bill number 251, the act to amend Chapter 376 of the Revised Statutes, 1989, the Public Service Act. Bill number 258, an act to amend Chapter 46 of the Revised Statute, 1989, the Building Code Act. And also, Mr. Speaker, Bill number 203, an act respecting voluntary psychiatric treatment. Bill number 256, an act to amend Chapter 18 of the Acts of 1998, the Municipal Government Act, as amended. And in saying that, Mr. Speaker, I would like to, well, Mr. Speaker, this concludes.
Order, please. Order these bills be referred to the Committee in the whole House on bills. Y'all member co-harboration passage?
You want to move adjournment? Yeah, you got to move adjournment.
Order, please. Honorable Deputy Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry. This concludes the business of the day, and I would like to recognize the House Leader of the NDP to set tomorrow's hours and the nature of business.
Y'all member co-harboration passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tomorrow, the hours will be from 2 p.m. until 6 p.m. And after the daily routine and question period, we will be calling resolution number 4462, which is related to Cisco pensioners, and bill number 248, which is the Income Tax Act. And I so move adjournment of the House until tomorrow at 2 p.m.
Motion is the House adjourned to 2 p.m. tomorrow. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The House is adjourned to 2 p.m. tomorrow.